There's this quiet exodus happening pretty much right under our noses, but it's not the kind that makes the evening news. We're seeing some of the most conscious, most psychologically developed people, well, they're withdrawing from society. They're not storming off or making a big scene, they're just quietly disappearing. And what's so wild is that the psychologist Carl Jung basically predicted this. He even had a name for it, the necessary withdrawal.
So let me ask you, have you felt this yourself? That kind of deep pull to just go off grid, to delete your social media, maybe even walk away from a career or certain friend groups that just don't feel right anymore. If you've had that urge to just leave it all behind, then this is for you. Because according to Jung, what you might be feeling is something really, really profound.
And look, this is the part we absolutely have to get right. This desire to pull away isn't some kind of personal failing. It doesn't mean you're antisocial or trying to escape reality. It's actually a sign that your consciousness has expanded so much that the collective container, society with all its unspoken rules and expectations, it just doesn't fit you anymore. So, okay, why does this happen? Why is it that as you become more conscious, normal, everyday life can start to feel, well, unbearable? Let's dive into the first part of this and break down the psychological reasons for what Jung called the burden of seeing. The way society works, it kind of runs on this collective unconsciousness. It's built on these shared delusions and agreed-upon blind spots. And here's the kicker. This isn't a bug in the system. It is the system. It only really works if everyone stays asleep and plays along. So the moment you wake up, you suddenly become this glitch in the matrix. You can see the game for what it is, and you just can't play it unconsciously anymore. And what this does is it creates this really specific, intense kind of loneliness. I mean, you can be in a room packed with people at a party or a work meeting, but feel completely and utterly alone because you're basically seeing a different reality. Every little conversation requires you to pretend you don't see what's really going on beneath the surface. And that constant performance, it's just exhausting. Okay, so a huge piece of this seeing is about recognizing what Jung called shadow projection. Think of it like this. We all have parts of ourselves we don't really want to look at. Our anger, our insecurities, our flaws. That's our shadow. Well, shadow projection is when we unconsciously take all that stuff and pin it on other people or other groups instead of dealing with it ourselves. And once you've done the really hard work of facing your own shadow, watching society do this on a massive scale becomes, well, agonizing. This quote from one of Jung's students just nails it, doesn't it? Suddenly the world isn't about right versus wrong anymore. It's like you're watching this mass psychosis unfold. You start to see that most of these big social and political fights are just collective shadows beating up on each other. And you just can't, in good conscience, pick a side anymore. And this is exactly why people who are waking up often disappear from social media first. It is a nonstop, 24/7 shadow projection machine, a constant shadowboxing ring. Every scroll, every comment section is just dripping with it. And for a conscious person, it starts to feel like a kind of psychological violence, like you're being forced to watch people punch themselves in the face while blaming everyone else for the bruises. Okay, so that brings us to the second big reason for this withdrawal, and it's a huge one. As you start to awaken, you connect with your authentic self, the real you, under all the layers. The problem is, society often doesn't want your authentic self. It demands a persona. The persona is the mask we wear, right? The good employee, the cool friend, the perfect parent. It's a performance. And this quote from an executive who went through this process, wow, it just says it all. She realized she couldn't sit in those board meetings anymore. Why? Because the only part of her that was welcome in that room was her polished executive persona, and that part of her was gone. So she quietly disappeared, not because she failed, but because she succeeded at finding her true self, which made it impossible to keep up the old act. So if staying is that painful, what's the withdrawal for? What's the point? Well, that brings us to our next section, which is all about reframing this disappearance, not as an escape, but as this really crucial, almost archetypal period of preparation. Jung talked about this thing called psychological labor. It's this invisible, draining work that conscious people do just to exist in unconscious spaces. You're constantly filtering out projections, holding your own ground, maintaining your own frequency. It's literally like trying to swim upstream against a tsunami. And eventually, you just have to get out of the water or you're going to drown. And this is where we see that this whole hermit phase isn't about hiding away. It's actually a super active, productive process.
It has a very clear purpose. You withdraw to preserve that consciousness you've worked so hard for, to finish integrating your shadow away from all that social pressure, to really get to know and embody your authentic self, and to develop your own inner wisdom without all the noise from the outside world.
So, and this is so important to remember, this phase isn't about hating people. It's not about rejecting the world. It's a psychological necessity. It's an archetypal need. The psyche requires this period of solitude to put itself back together, to integrate all the pieces that society would otherwise try to fragment. It's actually a really sacred and profound time of inner work. But look, this withdrawal, it's not the end of the road. Jung was really clear that the hermit phase is never meant to be a final escape. It's preparation. Which brings us to our final section, the return.
So when these people come back, they don't just, slide back into their old lives. They come back differently. They can't go back to the mainstream, back to the center of that unconscious collective. Instead, they find their place on the margins, on the edges of society, where they can offer their consciousness to the world without getting consumed by it and without having to compromise who they've become. So they step into these new roles that allow them to contribute from this really unique position. They become the artists, the healers, the teachers, the guides. They become what Jung called border dwellers. They're present and available to society, but they're not controlled or absorbed by its systems. And this just perfectly sums up the bigger picture here. What might look like abandonment to the outside world is actually an act of architecture. These individuals are quietly building the new, conscious structures, the parallel systems that will be there to support a collective awakening when it's ready. They are, in a very real way, the architects of a new world.
All right, so let's bring this all home. What does this all mean for you, personally, if you're the one feeling this powerful, undeniable pull to withdraw? Look, the message here is one of just deep validation. Your withdrawal isn't random. It's a necessary, archetypal part of your growth. You are not weak for not being able to tolerate unconsciousness. You are simply conscious. It's a call to stop performing for audiences that can't even see the real you. And your disappearance? It isn't selfish. It's preparing something vital that both you and the world desperately need. The people who are awake are disappearing, because in a way, that's what awakening asks of you. In that silence, they're cultivating something the collective just isn't ready for yet. So I guess the real question that this leaves us with is this: what gifts, what treasures, can only be developed in disappearance?